Welcome everyone. Hello to today's dox42 class about the brand new server designer. My name is Johannes Linder. I'm the lead technical evangelist at dox42, and gladly I'm not alone here today. I'm also joined by Diego. Hi Diego.
Hi, my name is Diego Schleiss and I'm a new developer at dox42, and I'm also one of the main developers for the new dox42 server designer.
So basically one of the responsible persons that helps you ease up the process of generating the documents. Thanks, Diego. What we've planned for you today is there is going to be a general introduction into the buttons, overview, usability, which is going to be done by Diego. And then I will show you some samples that we can work on with the new server designer that ease up Azure Active Directory, generally the parameters in the actions that you have. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it. And so Diego, what's up with the new server designer?
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right. Before we even get started with the usability, we of course have to download the server designer. So it's pretty simple. You just go to our website, to the download page, and you'll find the dox42 server designer beta version. And you just click on download. You don't need to log in. You just get the server designer right there. And you will get a zip file, and you just need to unzip the folder and open this setup.exe, and you're good to go. But I won't do this now because I already have it installed. So here it is, the new server designer. As some of you probably can tell, it's very reminiscent of the dox42 Office add-ins, and that was the goal with the UI design. And yeah, first things first, we just add a call, and you'll see that all the buttons have color, and these are the call parameters. So let's start off with input parameters, slurring my words. For example, we could use employee ID and a 1. That would be a simple input parameter. Also, if someone is still using a service header login, you can do so. You just need to provide a username and a password. And the server designer now has support for the Azure AD login. And here you can choose between two modes. First of all, you have the classic Azure AD login, and that pops up the classic Microsoft login screen where you can log in with your Microsoft account. But you also have the possibility to use an Azure AD access token for authentication. Next up, we've got the common authority, then the Azure AD app ID, and the app desktop redirect URI and the SharePoint Online URL. But Johannes will go into detail later on. Now we have reached the dox42 server default output actions. So let's start off with the SharePoint action. And as you already have noticed, probably, all the parameters are already here. So you don't have to type them in manually, like in the old server test client. And also, they have different colors. So red parameters are mandatory. Without them, the call won't work. And the yellow parameters are only mandatory if some other field has a value. Now we have the save action, same thing, email action, return action, print action, SQL action, and we also have got two custom output actions, the DocuSign action and the CRM action. That's it for the call parameters. Let's say I want to make a copy of this call. I just click on clone and I get a copy with all calls and parameters. With all actions and parameters, I'm sorry. And yeah, as you can see, the service header login is not here, but it's a beta, okay? Now let's delete the copy. Either you hit delete in the app or on your keyboard. Right here. And Of course, we want to delete it. And that's it. Now, if we had multiple calls, we can also move them around. Yeah. And now you can also open the dox42 server documentation if you get stuck configuring any output actions. But you won't find the custom output actions, so the DocuSign action or the CRM action in here. But there's probably other documentation out there. Now, the dox42 SOAP service URL, you just let's use one of our demo servers. So with this URL, the server designer knows which service to call. And this is also mandatory. So without this field, the call won't work. And here you have a small menu. You can, if you choose to have a new config, completely new one, you just press new. And of course, the server designer asks you if you want to save, but we don't want to save. And it will generate a new config with an empty call. We of course can open existing calls. So I would take one of Johannes' configs, and it loads the configs, the calls with all the parameters. Then you can also open configs you've recently worked on. And I will show you guys that the server designer can also support custom output actions. So custom output actions you have made. I've made a test one here, and you can just load them in. There's not yet a possibility to add them here, but it will hopefully be here in the future. And then we move on. Of course, you can save. Either you hit save as, or you can just save normally. And this option is always available. And since the server designer, the new one, is in the beta version, you can also report a bug. And if you enter something here, so you give it a heading and a description, and you can also choose the severity of the bug. And then you just hit send report, and an email draft will open with the default email app. Now, if this doesn't work for you, you can also just email my email address, and I would be very, very happy about feedback. It would help the development greatly. Now let's move on to call service. You can either, so if you want to make a call, you either hit this button, or you can also use the shortcut Control, Shift, and C. By the way, the server designer supports almost all default Windows shortcuts, so you can hit Control O to open a file, for example. Then we also have a REST URL button, and here you can generate a REST URL from the selected call in here. Now you could also open this in the browser, and it would directly open the REST URL, but we can't do this here because we don't have a service URL. Now lastly, we have this open file menu. So here you would get a list of files, of returned files from return actions and so forth. And here, for example, would be the format, so .pdf. And then you just hit open file, and the returned file opens. Now that's it from the usability side, but how do you actually create a functional call?
Thanks, Diego, for the great introduction yet to the server designer. So next step, we're going to put this in a live scenario. And what I'd like to do with you today is going to be a scenario where the template will be in SharePoint Online. We will use the dox42 Online service, and we're going to save it to SharePoint. We're going to send out an email, and we will also, what Diego has shown in the end, show you a PDF generation. So this will all be one call. And that's something that I've already prepared as one of the configs that Diego has already shown. By the way, configs also, of course, are supporting dox42 Live. So in case you already use dox42 Live, the configs you have on your server, for example, is something that can be loaded by the dox42 server designer, changed, and then if saved, will also work with dox42 live. It's also a scenario I will cover in a couple of seconds. All right, then let's jump to one of, as Diego has shown, the recent one, which also makes it handy to open the latest one. And the one that I would like to see is the SharePoint and Metadata one. So basically, the thing that I need to define in the very beginning, of course, is our web service. This web service, as you can see by the URL here, is dox42. Oh, I didn't start sharing my screen. So that's, we just start with this. Thanks for the hint. By the way, if you have any questions, there is a question panel. Feel free to ask them there as well. All right, so I'm just going to start from scratch again. So let's just close this. Basically, what I did is opening the server designer here. And like I've just said, click on open recent, and then I saw one that I just recently used, which is going to do all the things that I've just mentioned. So having a template in SharePoint Online, working with dox42 Online service, saving it to SharePoint, sending out an email, and opening a PDF. As you can see, there is our, well, what I've just mentioned when you didn't see, there's dox42 Online as the service part. So that's linking to dox42 Online. Of course, this could also be some URL that you use within your on-premise system. So use the same server designer for on-premise as well as cloud applications. And we are linking to what Diego has just shown to our ASMX, so to our SOAP service, with a template that is in this case saved in SharePoint Online, with some input parameters, with an Azure Active Directory login, and with the SharePoint action, an email action, and also a return action. Now, first things first, let's have a look into the template to just also have a view on the one hand where you see the template, but also what that means to the input parameters that you need to clarify in the server designer. So I've just opened that document already from SharePoint, and if I click on generate, there is an input parameter that I, as the designer, need to fill in. In our case, the employee ID, which has a nice value that is basically telling me the name, but in the background, we're working with the value. So we are, for example, using Michaela, which has an ID of 1. And if I do the same thing here and generate, it will show me Michaela's document in Word in the designer. If we move this to the server designer, then we basically include the input parameters up here. If you click on it up here, then it will include this. And there is the employee ID, and I've just chosen 1, which is Michaela. And if we also have a look into our data map, of course, you will also see that in the structure of the data map. So basically input parameter, the employee ID. The next thing that I need is my Azure Active Directory login, which of course is very important if your template is stored on SharePoint Online and if you work with our dox42 Online service. And there is different modes, like we've seen already. So there's the AD login, or we could also work with an access token directly, but we work with the login. In this case, there's the common authority, which is filled in for the moment, so you don't need to change this. If it changes or if you have some other applications, we still left this to be editable. Then there is the app ID, there is a redirect URI for my local desktop application, and there's my SharePoint Online default site collection URL. These informations is something you find if we have a look into Azure Active Directory. There's dox42 Online, there is the overview of our app, which has a directory, which also has, of course, well, the tenant. That's something at the moment I don't need to fill in, because locally I'm logged in with my user. My user knows which tenant it is in, so the tenant is already clear. For those of you that are not familiar with the concept of the accounts locally, it's basically, well, this is German, but if you look for the accounts and emails in your Windows, you will find that there is a account you can add, and that's the one that I will use later on for generating the ID token into my application to get the file from Azure Active Directory. All right, so for the server designer, we will need the app ID here. We will need, if we have a look into our authentication, there is a web URL redirect URI, but that's not needed in that moment. We will need a mobile and desktop application, dox42.com. That's something you can define for yourself. And once put here, be sure to put it here as well. The SharePoint Online URL, I guess, is clear, and the app ID is also something we've just covered. So that's basically taking my account, getting an ID token, and doing all the Azure Active Directory magic to get the file from SharePoint Online. Next thing, now we've basically done the part of the input, we want to do the part of the output. So the SharePoint action has parameters as they are defined in the documentation, as well as in this overview here. So whenever clicking on any of those parameters, you will see down here that the tooltips are ready to be read, and you don't need to have the server documentation open all the time. And the red ones, like Diego mentioned, are the mandatory ones. The yellow ones are those that are mandatory if another field is, for example, selected. For my call, in this case, I've chosen a site, which is our employee site, and a library, all contracts. So basically, I want to the template I've just opened from the same site. There is an all contracts library, and I want to save this file in here. If I just sort this newer to older, we've just done it for another session. Let me just delete this. You actually see it's live data. And we also, as you see, saving the file dynamically. The syntax of this is that there's a data source dot data field. So basically, if we go back to the data map of this document and check the data map, we'll see there will be a candidate list, and any of those fields, if you click on test, you will see them. Well, that's the selected one, but still you see the fields. So for example, the ID, the title, all of those fields can also be used for dox42 output actions. And that's what we do with the title. So that's actually the name of that person. Now the rest is something we could also use, folders, special formats, whatever you want to integrate. But in this case, we are working with Azure AD. That's very important. As you work with dox42 Online, it's most likely, or in all cases at the moment, going to be Azure Active Directory true. And I also want to include fields, metadata fields into SharePoint. So there is the employee, as well as, again, I'm including the title, so basically the name, into the column of the employees. If we have a look into this in our SharePoint library again, you see there is the employee field. That's the metadata I also include when doing the call. Next off, our email action. Same principle, or similar principle at least. Again, there you have the parameters here, you have the documentation down here, and you also see what's mandatory in case something is selected or not selected. And what I'm doing in this case is I'm generating the same contract that I will upload to SharePoint, also as an email, as an attachment. But I'm also doing a nice looking mail body that also has a dox42 document. So I'm working with the body template as a template that is also saved into the very same library that I've just shown you. And instead of having just like a text file that you send out, for example, to your customers, you have a nice looking mail body with images, with conditions, and it links to the same data map as the contract. So basically all the information in the email is dynamic based on the data map as well. The last thing we're going to do in this very call is the return action, where we have just the format as a PDF. And that basically will allow us later on, when we've done the call, that there is going to be an open file option as a PDF. Great, so much for the information that I've included in this call. Let's run it. If I click on call service, you will see a prompt that basically, just like I've shown before, will log in with this account. If you don't have anything in here, or if you have two, it will open up a login where you can define which one you want to use to log in. Let's call the service. That's my login, and it's now going to do all of the actions down here. Successful is great. I've also received an email in the meantime. And let's start with the SharePoint action. So what we've just done with the SharePoint action in here is to upload the file to the very library I've just shown you. So a few seconds ago, my user has uploaded this file, as we've named it, the name.pdf, as well as some metadata in here. If we want to include the employee ID down here as well, the only thing we need to do is to add another parameter. So let's jump to the SharePoint action, go down here and include a new field. That's the employee ID as you've just seen, and it also has a value. I could hard code anything I want here, of course, but if we want to make this dynamical, then let's just add, in this case, not the field title, but the field ID. All right. Then there is the email action, which we will keep the same, but if we call the service again, it will again send out the email, of course. And again, do a quick check. You see now we've also included the employee ID. The second action we've chosen was the email action. If I just open the one we've just sent, as you've seen, it has been just sent right now. There's also the information about Michaela, about her position. So a nice looking draft email body or email body. And if I just go to contract here, just open my second screen. Basically see this contract as an attachment, and of course a nice looking mail body. Let me just briefly show that to you so that you believe that it's actually a Word document as a part of this. So there is our mail contract body. I'll open that again in our app. There you see the blue fields again coming in from any of the data sources, as well as we just have a look again on the email. See that it's very similar to what we've just seen in the Word document. Again, making it very easy for business user also to do some design as a professional email that goes out. And lastly, of course, there is our return action down here. And if I click on open file, again, you will see the very same contract that I've just seen with all the dynamics that we have in that very contract. Perfect. So that's it for that call. What I'd also like to show you is that now this is as a template that is in SharePoint and also takes data from SharePoint. But of course, you can also generate documents that not necessarily only integrate with SharePoint, but also all our other data sources. And if I open one of my configs, which is a sales invoice down here, this is a template that is stored in SharePoint Online, but takes data from finance and operations. And again, I've chosen the same Azure Active Directory parameters, but in our template, you will see that this is basically taking data from finance and operations. And I want to test it as a return action. And for those of you that are familiar with our finance and operations integration, there is what we call as an input parameter, the transaction ID, which basically gets a report that's already printed in finance and operations for testing purpose. So in this case, we're taking one of these transaction IDs. And if you want to test this yourself, if you are already able to generate the finance and operations document locally, just take one of these, the ones you have there, and put it here. Now, when calling the service, it will take data from finance and operations in this very moment based on our transaction ID and provide the file as a PDF file. And yeah, as you can see, well, there's a lot of logic in this, like line repeat, so the sales invoice lines repetitions. There's a sub document that gets included. So basically, a lot more options than SSRS provides out of the box. Cool. We've seen the SharePoint integration. We've also seen an example with another data source the last thing which I mentioned in the beginning, but is also very important, is that you can work with dox42 live configurations. And one of those, the ones that I would just want to open, dox42 live config. If you check all of the calls that you see here, that's the very same configuration that we also use for our dox42 live configuration. So if we check this, you see all of the calls that are configured here are the ones that get integrated into the server designer. The base of this is an XML file. So if we switch to the server designer folder, well, it's just my test folder. If I open this, what you see here is the XML configuration of dox42 live. And basically all of the new configurations that get opened or get saved will be done in that very format. And all the changes will also be, of course, then in that XML right away. If you've already worked with dox42 live before and you open it for the first time with the dox42 server designer, there are a couple of things you need to add, as they are not in the box, out of the box in the call provided in the dox42 live configurations. So one thing that you of course need is the service URL. So I'm just going to, if I want to test this, let me take this call and open the dox42 service.asmx, which again links to our SOAP service. Put it up here. And we want to take one example where there is the sales report, and what's in a configuration that has already been done in dox42 live still missing is an output action and the input parameters. If I want to find out what input parameters this has, I either look into the template or of course can also look into dox42 live. So if I go back to our sales report and open this really quick, there is an employee that gets again selected in here. Similar to the employee contract, we do this as part of a number in the background. So basically select employee as an input parameters as a number. Which one? There is one. Another one. There is the select year input parameter as well that I can choose. So let's also go here and include the select year and make this 2017, for example. So I've just included the service URL, the input parameters, and lastly, of course, I also need an output action. Let's just, for the simplest reason, use the return action and include a PDF file. Now, when doing this call, the service call is successful, perfect. And again, I can open another file that gets generated by our dox42 live service with everything that I've just changed. And if I go back, save it, and then upload the very same XML structure to my dox42 live service, it will already work out of the box, just has more information and the input parameters and the return action, which of course is not necessary for dox42 live at the moment. But when later on, again, changing it here and testing it here, you can do so right away. Perfect. That's our third scenario. So we've done the SharePoint scenario, we've done finance and operations. Now we've also worked with dox42 live. Just checking if there are any questions in the meantime. Looks fine for the moment. So let me just check my script if all of this, all of what I wanted to include is already included. Looks fine to me. All right. So last chance for any questions. Okay, so we have one question coming in. With calling multiple actions at the same time, so multiple calls at the same time. So for the moment, it's designed the way that you can actually generate one call per time, which works the same way as the dox42 service works. Basically, for example, if we have a template path, each call can only have one template, but you could have different templates like we do here. So one call will work with one call at a time, and then just click on call service and test it right away. I hope that clarifies the question. If there's more to add, just let us know. All right. 30 minutes on point, no questions left. Thank you very much. It was great that you joined us for today's session about the dox42 Server Designer. Thank you also, Diego, for delivering, of course, delivering your session. And yeah, to everyone else there, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Yeah.